Hello, good to be back. Everybody enjoyed the break, I hope. We're back on the stage with Matt. Matt is a C# developer. He's a developer advocate at JetBrains. He's going to show us around how to navigate a bit with JetBrains IDE for the .NET ecosystem. It's Rider. If you haven't used it so far, I encourage you to do it. It's really friendly, especially if you enjoy ReSharper. You're going to enjoy this as well, for sure. So, Matt, you have the stage.
Thanks.
Enjoy it.
Thank you. So, yeah, thanks for introduction. The first question actually would be how many of you are using ReSharper or have used it at any? Okay. And how many, keep your hands raised if you use Rider already? Well, that's the perfect audience, actually. So today I'm going to show you a few things about how to work with JetBrains Rider, but I will first start and explain a little bit about its architecture. So for for those who haven't heard of ReSharper, ReSharper was basically an extension for Visual Studio, a productivity extension. And but there was one thing with the rise of .NET Core, we were able to move cross-platform and also use OS X or Unix for development, but there was a lack of a proper IDE. And Rider is a cross-platform IDE for .NET development in general. It also includes some bits for F#, but also some other languages, of course, and mainly, of course, C#. Well, about its architecture, ReSharper was the extension for Visual Studio, so it was running on the .NET framework, obviously. What we did when we introduced Rider was to encapsulate, let's say, the ReSharper code base, which was already developed like in an encapsulated way, but we encapsulated it from Visual Studio, and now we needed a front end. And the front end is IntelliJ, IntelliJ as a platform. Who of you have heard about IntelliJ? Which is also quite a lot, which is an IDE for Java development in general. But actually, many of our IDEs, because we serve a lot of programming languages, many of our IDEs are based on the IntelliJ platform. And so the interesting thing here is that IntelliJ as the front end is running on the JVM, and ReSharper as a service runs on either the .NET Framework or Mono, depending on what operating system you are. So we have two processes, and they actually communicate with another great thing we invented, which is Kotlin. Who of you have heard about Kotlin? Okay, so just recently Google, I just want to mention, oh, it's going to sleep. Just recently, Google also mentioned that Kotlin is now the preferred programming language for Android development, just recently at the Google I/O. And so Kotlin, in between, is used for a protocol that basically ensures that we have the same data on both sides. So you can think of it as somehow a view model, let's say. There's one thing, though. People sometimes ask, okay, is this a new invention or something? But actually not. So we have a lot of shared code which is used inside Rider, which comes from the already existing ReSharper code. Those missing bits which are not included are basically some of the settings pages, because in Visual Studio it's obviously WPF or just Windows Forms. Plus, we don't use the TypeScript JavaScript support, which is present in ReSharper, but we use another part of our IDEs, which is WebStorm. Who has heard about WebStorm? So many questions, I'm sorry for that. Okay, so WebStorm is also a dedicated IDE for web development, and that's actually included in ReSharper. One more thing that's included, and I will show this probably roughly, is also DataGrip, which can help you to work with databases. Okay, and here is one of the biggest advantages using IntelliJ as a front end, because you could ask, okay, why not some other front end? There could be a few choices. But using IntelliJ as a front end brings a lot of benefits, because IntelliJ is already quite old, like I think roughly 15 years, something like that. And there are many features included which are, let's say, language agnostic. So some of those parts are mentioned there, like VCS integration with Git. I will also look at that in a moment. Command line integration, bookmarks, and so on. So mostly language agnostic things which don't depend on C#. And also that's a big plus down there. They're like a large ecosystem of existing plugins which you can use. Just because IntelliJ is on the market for so long already. Okay, so most of the rest will be demo, and I will just start with that. First thing, I think very, very important is navigating in your code, right? And so for this, we have the go to type pop-up, in which case you can just start typing and search for, in this case, for instance, initial letter search. So if you remember a certain type, and sometimes it's easier to just write the capital letters of that, and it would and it can just navigate to those files. A little bit more about navigation, some of the very basic stuff. We have an interface right here, and we could, for instance, navigate. I hope it's big enough. Yeah. We can navigate to all the derived types of this iVehicle interface. Worth to mention, I think, in this case, vehicle base is written with this bold font because it's an immediate inheritor of the interface. Unlike others, like car and plane, they only have this this inheritance implicitly, like transitively. And just suppose you have a large code base with a lot of hierarchy in there. It's really important, and that will follow throughout the presentation. In those pop-ups, you can just start typing and reduce the result set to what you're actually looking for, which is quite interesting. So I'm working with syntax trees a lot, and probably you know there's a tree node and so on, and there's a huge type hierarchy there, and it's really helpful if you have a big hierarchy. So I can navigate to derived classes, but also, of course, in the other direction. Many of you probably use, not only in your IDE, but also on Windows, Alt-Tab for navigating between windows. So in a single application, you use Control-Tab, which is okay, but you see, as soon as I release the keys, this pop-up goes away. In Rider, we have the opportunity to use a different shortcut, which is in my case Control, comma, and this pop-up stays open as long as you do something else. So again, we can type here, like I said, but we can also, let's bring this up again, navigate to all the tool windows on the left-hand side. Those are also searchable. So for instance, if I want to go to unit tests, I can just start typing with that. And by the way, since I was mentioning shortcuts just now, we have this entry point of either Alt-Enter or this is the Alt-Enter menu. You can actually do it from both sides. But there's also a menu called the Actions pop-up, in which case, like if you want to go to a recent location like I did, you can, let's see where it is. It's called recent files, and you see the shortcut is just shown next to the action name, which is helpful, especially if you're doing pair programming and your colleague has a different key map or something. In that case, you don't really need to remember what was the shortcut, or maybe you're looking for something. So Rider actually helps you to learn the tool in a more, let's say, productive way, because shortcuts are always easier, right? Just because I mentioned that, just found out today, actually, you have this recent files pop up, and if you hit that very same shortcut again, you see that this checkbox was enabled, and now what we did is to reduce the set of files shown to those that have been recently edited, which is also helpful if you're navigating around a large code base and you just want to move back to wherever you have been editing something. Also introduced just recently is the recent locations. I haven't actually assigned a shortcut yet for that, but if we open that, you even get a little bit more context that is shown to you, like all the stuff that was on the previous locations you've been navigated to, and not just the file name, basically. And again, here we can reduce to the edited files. Sometimes, another thing about navigation, it's good enough to just say, okay, I'm somewhere now, doesn't really matter where, but I want to go back to the last location where I've been editing something. There's also a shortcut for that, and if I just hit that, you see I'm going through all the files that I've been editing recently, which is called, in this case, I think, edit location or something, last edit location, and again you see the shortcut shown there. Okay. By the way, all this stuff with inheritors, and you see also extension methods here, they're also shown as little code vision items above your declarations. Like in this case, for this type, we have a bunch of extension methods too. And the interesting part, I think, here is those are you see forward is typed on the iVehicle type. Meanwhile, not null and invoke they are more like general, let's say, because they are typed one time generic, one time for object. And you see it's also sorted from being more special to being more general. And again, here, I just want to really underline that you can always start typing and reduce the result set. Okay, let's continue with this interface. We have a property seats. And let's say we want to find out where the value is coming from. We can say we want to show, okay, that was maybe a little bit fast. Value origin, again, value origin. Just a second ago it was there. Because the caret is not there. Again, show value origin. And now this, I hope you can see this in the back too. Now this tool window is opening and we can use this tree to follow back where a value for this seats property is coming from. And ultimately, if we continue our search long enough, we can see that here a car is created with 4 as a value for the seats property. Okay. So far, so good about navigation, I think. Anything else? Well, of course, we have a to-do explorer. I think in this case, I'm not sure. Yeah, I have some to-dos over there. You can decide how you want to organize that based on file, project, and so on. And we also, that's also one of the previous editions, introduced this breadcrumb bar, which basically tells you where exactly the caret is currently placed, which also works with delegate methods, anonymous methods, and so on. But in this case, we see right now we're in the CTOR, and you can just click on that and navigate back and forth. There's also a shortcut, for instance, for creating new files right from the editor. In this case, we would create a new class just next to this current file where we're currently working in. Okay, so far so good about navigation, I think. Any questions so far? You can also raise your hand in between, by the way. Okay, So I think I want to continue with that, right? You probably know much of that stuff already if you're using ReSharper. If you paste some code, for instance, or now I just uncommented it, ReSharper helps you to make all the imports to make your code actually work. So right now it was adding this using for systems.location. You can also tell from this little indicator on the left. You can see that this has not been committed yet. I will go back probably to this in a moment. But Rider also helps us to make use of new language features, like in C# 7 point something, I don't really remember. They introduced this way to just write default as a keyword, and it will interfere the type from just the left-hand side of the assignment. So I can do just that, but also note that in this case we have the opportunity to, well, if we are right here, let's go back, remove redundant type specification, we can also go to write and decide to make this fix, let's say in the whole file, in the whole project or whole solution, which is really convenient if there are new C# language features and you just want to update your whole code base. And I could just, it's the only occurrence in this case, but I could do this for my whole solution. Okay, some other things, working with strings, if you want to split them so that they fit on the screen, you can just hit enter, that's all. Rider will insert the plus at the end and also bring it to the other side on the left or to the next line. We can also, let's say, list, and I probably need 2 string for that, and it's 1 plus too many. You see again, it removes some of the redundant code. But in this case, what I want to show is you can switch to using interpolation instead of concatenation. So I can just do that, and then somewhere here, our list variable is just inlined with this string interpolation. The next example is really great. I mean, it's made up basically, but sometimes it happens. You're writing some code which basically works, but it's not really the most readable piece of code, like this one. We have, I mean, this very next line. We have a variable which says that the paragraph only contains letters, and you see, I hope it fits on the screen. Yes. And you see we have negation in the front, then an any, then some negation in between two, and a lambda, and like everything. It just makes your brain explode, maybe. So in this case, in zoom mode it wasn't visible, but in this case, ReSharper helps us to simplify this expression. And I can just say, okay, I want to replace this with all. And later on, I can also convert this lambda to a method group. And this is already way easier to read. I hope everyone agrees. One thing that's really interesting here is, anyone has an idea why this isLetter method is underlined with this orange line? Anyone has an idea? Louder, please. Right. Yes. So this is basically a functionality that is introduced with a plugin called Heap Allocation Viewer. And it's especially interesting for everyone who's interested in making their application more performant, who needs to pay special attention to all the allocations that are happening. Yeah, maybe raise hands who's interested in performant code. A few. Yeah, it takes some time. Just recall, do I have to support? Yeah. So in this case, it tells us, let's bring this up again, there's a delegate allocation using this method group. And it also works in other places, like, for instance, here. We have an I enumerable, and we are iterating over that enumerable. And this really allocates an enumerator in the background with a little note here. We don't really know what's the implementation of this iRenumerable instance, so it might also be cached, but usually not. Here's one thing that I just recently discovered. How many of you have heard about cyclomatic complexity? Okay, and how many of you value cyclomatic complexity as a metric? Okay, still a few. So there's one problem with cyclomatic complexity. Just consider those two code snippets, and those are 5 for eaches, and those are 1, 2, 3, 4. But even if it's the same amount, as far as I know, cyclomatic complexity would issue the same metric. It would be they would have the same complexity. And just recently, I discovered this metric called cognitive complexity and implemented it as a plugin. And what you see here is, if I will just collapse that, that is added with a plugin. And we can see there are some code vision items again, which says in the first example where it's nested, it's very complex. It's already 200% of the threshold that I've set. Meanwhile, this non-nested way is way easier to comprehend. And that was actually not such a lot of work. So writing plugins for Rider is also quite easy. Okay, what else? Yeah, something that I really love. How many of you have heard about postfix templates? None. Great. How many of you know Yoda from Star Wars? So this will maybe remind you a little bit of Yoda, because we have this factory method right here. Create car, and maybe you recall we have already seen the constructor for the car type. And now in this case, what I would usually write is return new car, parentheses, passing the parameters, and so on. In this case, it's more like oriented. We could just read actually the signature of that method, because we start with car, right? So I would just write car. Now afterwards, I need to create this type. I type .new. I will complete, and the new expression goes to the front, and we get also the parentheses completed. Now next, okay, this is a bit of manual work, seats and maximum velocity. By the way, in this case, it's a bad example. I should have used some string parameter maybe as well. We also have smart completion, so in this case, you get only the identifiers or variables shown which represent an integer, because we're awaiting an integer at this point. Let's see. I forgot the shortcut. Parameter info. No, that's not the right thing. Escape. Parameter info, right there. Maximum velocity. So maximum velocity. And next, now I'm at the very end. I could just say return, and that's all. Return statements goes to the front, and the line is completed with a semicolon. By the way, in this case, if you're writing something like that, there's also the complete statement shortcut. So if you're just, I don't know, somewhere and you write seats, you could invoke the complete statement action, and it will insert the semicolon at the very end. Okay. So here's an exercise for postfix templates. And anyone is brave enough to tell me what I should type, maybe? I will guide a little. No one, okay. Okay, this method is supposed to return all the big vehicles based from a collection that we get as an input. Okay, so we start by typing vehicles, and now I will just say for each. It completes to the for each statement. Note that let's go back for a second. We also get meaningful suggestions for all the, we call it hotspots, which are defined through our settings. So in my settings, I decide, okay, well, I prefer var over the actual type name. and I can just type through, continue through it. Vehicle is already interfered from the vehicles identifier, so it's the singular version of that. And now I could continue, and by big vehicles, let's say they have a amount of seats greater than 10. Okay, but only if, right? So I can complete to the if statement again, and then I want to yield return. And that's how you do it with postfix templates. And afterwards, you can just, I don't know, convert back to link chain methods. Okay, so what else? Yeah, I promise I will show a little bit about data grip, but first, sometimes we're working with strings which basically contain some code. Like in this example, we have a this is supposed to be a regular expression. You can also tell maybe from the comment before that. Now there's this opportunity to either use comments for that, or if you don't want to use comments, you see now the string also became just red, or dark red. We can also decide to go into the Alt-Enter menu and say, okay, this is a .NET regular expression. So you see, we get this highlighting, and more importantly, because no one can master regular expressions, it seems, if I start typing a slash, I get all the existing or all the available character classes suggested. Question? Yeah, that's actually the only thing I don't know. As far as I don't want to lie, but I think they're persisted in the settings files. I'm not exactly sure. It might be also that they're in the cache. That's why actually I prefer those comments before. Yeah. Which unfortunately don't yet have an action to, I mean, there's no setting currently, as far as I know, but yeah. If you ever discover that, just choose the comments then as a fallback, maybe. The same with HTML. And okay, so now we could start writing a link or something, href, and you see code completion for this as well, including also quotation. Well, all the hard work that you would do manually, and you type everything wrong and so on, this is just included. And now, this is very, very exciting, actually. Let's say I want to write a database query. And you see, this suggests some of the tables that I have, that our local database provides. So in this case, we have a context table and so on. I can barely write any SQL, but this really helps to, you know, continue even if you're not used to write any of those. And just because we're at it, database, there's this database tool window right here where you can also add various of your data sources. So we have support for a bunch of them. I'm not working with databases, so I have no idea if it's complete. But yeah, it seems like a lot, at least. Okay, 30 minutes. Let's see. Navigation, we had navigation, stuff like that, yeah. So here are a bunch of those language agnostic features that I've mentioned. For instance, there's a plugin that helps you maintaining your git ignore file, or any of the other ignore files that you may use for Subversion or any of the other. I think you can actually, let's say, add new, no, not here, probably, but somewhere here. Add, and there's the ignore file, and you can choose from a bunch of those. And this actually incorporates the templates that I think in the GitHub/ignore repository, the templates that are present there. And you can select from a bunch of them, and they get just merged into one file. Also, you see this entry with debug, it actually affects some of the files that are present currently on my file system. Meanwhile, this release entry, it could be removed just because it doesn't affect any files currently. So it's always helping you removing some of the redundant code. Okay, in this case, it's not code exactly, but I think you get what I mean. Anyone using AppWare or Travis? Or anyone working with YAML files? Okay, a few JSON files, also a few, so it's worth to mention. Many times if you're editing some of those files, in this case it's a YAML file for Travis, it's hard to keep or have a broad overview where you currently are, what values are allowed to type and so on. In this case also they're great. There's no code completion. That's it might be because I deselected the. Okay, great. Because I'm not connected. Anyway, what you can do here, usually it should suggest one of those OS X and Linux and Windows and so on. What you can do, and this is the important thing here. Let me just, this is not so great. But down here, you can see there's in the status bar, there's an entry for the JSON schema, and you can select from one of the schemas, and also load your own schema, and you will just get code completion for that. Also highlighting if some values doesn't match what the schema says. And yeah, you get just nice little code assistance for that. Okay, let's go back here. Working with log files is also made quite easy. There's a plugin called ideolog. Actually, I'm wondering why it's not called ideolog, but anyway, you can see, well, it's a common pattern to write something like W for warnings and then maybe the origin of the log message. And so in this case, the plugin makes sure that informational stuff gets highlighted in green, verbose is still gray, and so on. And we could just place our cursor, let's say, on this def-env host discovery and say, okay, I want to reduce the result set to all the lines that include this identifier. And so all the other lines get hidden and forwarded for us. And yeah, if you hover over them, you can just reveal them, but anyway. But there are actually a lot of other options that you can use. You can also decide to highlight certain identifiers, or if you're printing stack traces into your log files, then you can also make them navigatable. So you can just click on a method and it will jump to the actual source. Okay, restore all hidden files. Who made the step going to moving cross-platform? Any of you? Working with OS X instead of Windows or something? Maybe a few? Not so many? Anyway, I would just mention it because Bash, for instance, I had to do some work with Bash in this case, and I have no idea of Bash, but this plugin made sure that I can also learn this new language, well, for me it's new language, and try to avoid some of the common mistakes. Like in this case, they prefer to use double brackets for those if statements, but I can also use the find usages feature, find usages, so I can move to all the places where this particular variable is used. And of course, I can also rename and stuff. This also works with PowerShell. PowerShell, for instance, has this weird way of handling of handling null comparisons, because null always needs to be on the left-hand side. So in this case, also this inspection is making us aware. And so you see there are a bunch of plugins not necessarily provided by us, but which are provided from the community just to make development a bit easier. Also for README files, there's this preview on the right-hand side, and yeah. Okay, so far a bit about the language agnostic stuff, or maybe one more thing. Let's see. So this is another project. It's not exactly big, to be honest, but I just want to show you some of the stuff we provide for VCS support. It works equally fast with bigger repositories, like the ReSharper solution has around like 400,000 commits, I think. And if we start typing here and search for help, for instance, you get immediately a filter, the filtered items provided that are containing help. Or you can decide, okay, I want to reduce that to a certain branch, which is a common thing. But we can also decide to, let's say, reduce to a certain user. And in this case, we get code completion again. So one of my team colleagues, he uses different names sometimes, so I can just use completion for that. Or what I'm particularly a fan of is this paths filter, where you can say, okay, I want to show only commits that affected, let's say, not output, but let's say this particular project. And if I hit OK, I get another filtered set. Okay, there's also the, well, maybe not so interesting, but where is it? Wrong. Yeah, you see, sometimes I also forget the VCS operations pop-up. Control V. Some of the common VCS operations, like also if you're in the middle of rebasing, what we do is just, for instance, if there are merge conflicts or something, then the rebase will stop. You can continue to edit the code, resolve all the conflicts, and then you can, from this menu, you can decide to just continue the actual rebase. And again, you can start typing here. Like with the ReSharper solution, we have a lot of remote branches, such a lot it's quite hard to browse them. And again, here you can just start typing and reduce to the ones that you're interested in. One more thing here, if any one of you needs to debug multiple projects at the same time, Rider has this thing called run configurations implemented, and I have some over here. Those are just normal configurations which actually start a certain project. Okay, good enough, very, very simple. But there are also compound run configurations, and in this case, you can see I have two of them. They're actually pretty similar. But what happens if I, let's go back here. If I want to debug them, I can just select this particular run configuration, the compound configuration. By the way, I also have NyanCat, and it's gone already, which is also a plugin. And I typed some code meanwhile, which is not so good. Let's do this again. Yeah, it was just so that I can show you NyanCat again over there, whatever. And now you have this run dashboard, which I also discovered just recently, and I think it was just added. And the interesting part here is I can switch between my currently running and debugged applications. And if I continue, I don't really remember. And there should be an exception, right? And now you see you have this debug view, which is changing depending on which application you select. Also here, of course, let's say where I am right now, if I add a new watch, I have code completion for this as well, so I get text completed. But also in the editor, you can see that those variables are shown in line. So in this case, text is shown what's the actual content, vertex directory, dictionary has a count of 13. Well, many of the most interesting information that you can get from your code. 20 minutes. Okay, let's go back to this nice demo application. Some stuff about testing. Or maybe first, just because it fits so well, the last talk was a bit about C#8 language features. So I really expect someone to tell me what this means. Huh? Right. Yeah. So this is the full range operator, would address the full array. But more interestingly, in this case, we first need to compile that so that I can show you. But what's also integrated, just since the last version, I think, is an IL viewer. And so in this case, let's hide some of the other things. We can see what the compiler is actually generating in this case. And so there is, okay, this is maybe not so interesting because it's just creating a new range instance. But let's write something like, we have an args array, let's say, default string, something like that. And now I want to get the last item. And the old way would be something along those lines here. By the way, this is postfix completion again, so I can decide to just introduce a variable from there. I will call it last item. And here you can see, well, apart from that, with the null reference exception, we can just apply some of those new language features and use the index from end expression. It will insert this hat operator. I have no idea if it actually has a name. I think it's called hat. And it will convert to the new language feature. And now if I recompile that, we can see that a bunch of new stuff is created here. And you could find out what is actually happening on IL level. Okay, let's remove this part. For tests, for instance, if you're having some flaky test which only occasionally fails, and maybe even only locally, there's this unit testing quick list for all the common operations that you can do with your tests. And one of the interesting parts here is the repeat test until failure option, which would just invoke test sessions over and over again until one of your tests fails. So, for instance, if you're having random code like this, yeah, just as an example. Okay, I will focus now a little bit on this method here. And by the way, we need to execute this test method, so we could reorganize our code a little bit better so that it's right beyond that declaration. And just a brief explanation what's happening here. We have a local function getPeople, which creates an array. The next is just filtering based on the length. The third will just invoke the printPerson method onto every of those items. And the last one is actually printing. And here's one example for the debugger. Let's see. Debugging, by the way, also via shortcut. Okay. So the next statement is highlighted here in yellow. Now what happens if we decide we want to debug into the printPeople method? What would you do? Anyone? Step in. But if you step in, you would first step into getPeople, right? So one approach which I used quite frankly all the time, is step in, step out, step in, step out. Or another good way is navigating to print people and put a breakpoint right there. Many times you can't really foresee how many step intos there will be, because sometimes it's also stepping into properties and whatnot. So it can be quite annoying. What we introduced, and what's actually also available which is actually also available for IntelliJ, so this feature was present there too, is the smart step into functionality. And if we hit that, we get all the possible next execution entries shown as a pop-up. And again, I can, if it was more entries, I could just start typing again. And okay, get people was not the thing, but print people, and let's say continue, and I'm in the print people method. Now, here's a hypothetical issue. Let's say we want to debug the print person method, but not just here, but we want to have Chris as a value there. So, and it should be somehow after this print people method has been called. So, like on the second time. And what we can do in this case are actually a bunch of things. We could use some conditions to make it work, and could put it into the print person method, but we're not always dealing with strings, so it's not always easy to come up with such conditions. By the way, again, here we have code completion, and which is also really nice. This is an array, so count wouldn't work, but it's suggesting count. If I complete with count, it gets actually converted to length. Yeah, but this just by the way. What I want to show instead is I can make this breakpoint to be dependent on another breakpoint. And I actually selected the wrong one. This breakpoint should be dependent on the other one, and we can just say, okay, this breakpoint should be disabled until the other breakpoint is hit. So I can just select that. Done. It turns into this just circle and not dot or whatever. And I could also, to make things easier, say that this breakpoint is non-suspending. So it gets only monitored to some certain extent, but we're not stopping our execution there. And now if I repeat my debug session, we should actually, if we stop here, we should get Chris as a value for S1. Hopefully everything works, and yes, it's there. By the way, there's also the parallel stacks window, which doesn't really work on a Mac, but it's probably better using, an actual mouse and its wheels and so on. But here you probably can see it. There's this idea of parallel executions, and what you actually see here is the stack trace of those parallel threads. Beside that, of course, you can also decide to change the thread from here. Where is it now? It just disappeared. Where's the other one? I have no idea where it went. Anyway, what I wanted to show is also the memory view. You can inspect all the instances that have been allocated for a certain type. So in this case, we could navigate all the string instances, and if I extend all of them, now all of them are shown. I can also see Chris is there. I'm not exactly sure if this also incorporates the debugger display attribute, which would be interesting. But anyway, I really need to check on this. Okay, 11 minutes. What else? Okay, there's Docker support, of course. You have all your containers there. You can create a new container also from here and decide, okay, I want to right-click, let's say, create. fill in all the configuration stuff. We can decide to attach. It is already attached, and just do our work from here. Some of the things I can't show you right now, but on Windows we also have a WPF preview, at least. There's no designer, but at least a preview. And for Windows Forms you actually have a designer, which is quite interesting also from the perspective of its architecture, because it basically works the same way. The actual designer is a second process which just gets shown inside the writer application. So this is really crazy. Okay, QF, navigation, what else? Okay, let's do a little bit about refactoring. Formatting. So sometimes it really depends if you need that or not, but I've seen it being helpful for people working with large data classes, and maybe even people working with Unity, it's not really great to look at a type like that. Just suppose there are many more members. And what you actually want to do is maybe to align the actual identifiers on the same column. So there's one way to do this with comments, and I could just type true here and format my code, just with the single shortcut again. Why I'm doing it with a comment right now is because you can actually also do this from the settings dialog here. And let's say it should be column something, code style. And you can also change that setting here, but that would affect your whole code base, and that's not always what you want. I hope at some point there will be probably also a dialog to generate those comments, but currently it's, I think, only available in ReSharper. But meanwhile, you could just, I don't know, write those manually. Okay, I really like those. Here are two things. First, let's concentrate on this line. What are we doing? I have no idea, because we're passing some true value and one as literal. No idea what it actually means, especially if you're, I don't know, looking at it from your source control, let's say. If the naming of the method, it's really hard to comprehend what's actually happening. And so there's this way to, let's go back, and it should be code style and then argument names, and we can, for instance, decide that literal values should always be named, and that we also want to issue warnings if they're not. And now if I save that, and by the way, this is also an important thing, every time you change some settings, it's useful to make a distinct decision where you want to save them, whether it's your local settings or for all of your solutions or team shared. Team shared makes sense for all the inspections that you change. So in this case, team shared, and now let's go back. You see we have this warning here, and we can easily fix that. And in this case, like I've shown earlier, we can decide to fix that in a bigger scope, and we could say, okay, fix that for the whole method call, and we get enable search and retry count added as argument names. Let's go back. This might be a little bit too invasive for some. So there's also the opportunity to enable parameter hints. And in this case, you get them just in line, shown in line, without actual code being there, but just for you to better read it, to read it more easily. Okay, here's an example. The file is called legacy. Legacy because in legacy code you find stuff like that when people just pasted something. This if statement gives us the impression that the second call is also done conditionally, right? It might be not too obvious at first, But with this actual inspection, let's say we could say, okay, this is severe enough to say it should be an actual error. So I can decide this should be an error, again to the team shared. Here's another case, would look like Python more or less. But again, here we can decide to configure its severity to error and team shared. And now if I can either use the quick fix again to fix indentation problems, or we can use the shortcut, which is the wrong shortcut, to format our whole file. Right, I actually forgot about this. Just for the sake of demonstration, I will insert some using that is not really necessary in this file. You also see it's grayed out. If I decide to commit that, and let's go to this actual file, and it was in legacy here, you can switch how the diff is shown. I would prefer, well, I'm mostly working on this MacBook, but actually for a real desktop PC, I would prefer this view. Also because of the fact that on the right-hand side, you get all the inspections and code assistance inline. So I can fix this using right from here. And I can, again, decide to do this in the whole solution. And I don't need to leave the commit dialog or anything. I can just do it from here. One more thing. Any one of you is using line-by-line staging when committing? No one, so you won't miss it. That's great, because we don't support it yet. I have no idea if it will come. But what we provide instead is the idea of change lists. And so what you can do with change lists is to, I have no idea, how do I create a new change list? Change list, new change list. If I create a new change list, I can somehow draft a commit message already and also put my changes. So here there was a change. I can move them between those change lists. And the actual workflow would be you can just continue doing your fixes, and maybe they are worth multiple commits. And you can just organize your change files into those change lists and commit them afterwards. Here's one other thing, another hypothetical situation. You're working on a bug, and let's say you start in the morning. At lunchtime, you realize, okay, what I had in the morning was almost the solution, but you deleted your code, unfortunately, already. So there's one way of just using the undo stack and go all the way back, but maybe you have, I don't know, messed up the undo stack already. Here's another way of doing things, which is local history. And local history will introduce change sets without you having to do anything. It just happens automatically. It's like this. I don't know if Windows still provides that, but I remember it from Windows Millennium Edition. Anyway, you get all those save points for some certain point in time, and you can decide to just revert to a certain moment. I should look at my screen, it's not so delayed. And what happens is not that the stack gets unfolded, but instead we create a new revert item, which you could use again and revert this, and it somehow works like an automatic versioning system, more or less. So you don't need to make draft commits or something meanwhile. Okay, anything else? I think yes, unit testing, I still have 1 minute. Let's see, this should work as well. Let's say I have a parameter, and anyone has an idea what this is? This icon And I mean not the light bulb, but the icon beside that. It's the, maybe you can't see it, but this little thing is the Roslyn icon. And what's happening here is actually that the Roslyn inspections are also run at a separate process, and they are just shown like any of the other ReSharper inspections. And here this is just a fix, actually, so I can execute this fix to remove the parameter. But for inspections, you can actually also configure them as if they were writer or ReSharper inspections. And so I have 10 seconds. I think I will just close this demonstration. And by the way, that's one thing I want to say at last. If you want to try out Writer or something, you can just drop me an email. I promise I won't use it for anything else, just to get your license for like a year. And yeah, that was it. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much. We also have two questions from the audience. If
2 questions.
you may, yeah.
2? That looks like more. Do you think
only the ones that are unanswered, so the first 2.
Only the first 2.
Yeah.
Do you think there will be also a free version of Writer similar to VS Community? I'm not sure. Really? But like I said, if you need to try it, if you want to try it, just give me a message. Does Writer has an immediate window where you can change variables, etc. in debug mode? Yes. Yes, it does. And there's also this send to, which I haven't shown, send to C# interactive. You can just select a bunch of code and Alt enter again and send to interactive, and that's it. So, yep. That's all the questions. Anything more which hasn't been submitted yet? Yes? Suggestions on solution level. You mean the bulk fixes? Yes, in ReSharper they're also available, yeah. And maybe one more thing, which I haven't mentioned, but a question that I get a lot actually, is do we need, or would you need, to convert any of your solution files or project files? That's a no, because Writer uses the same format, so it's no problem at all if you're in a team, just a few persons want to start with Writer and maybe want to see how it goes. That's no issue at all, so it works just like your code exists. Yes? I only understood XAML files. If it has support. There's certain support for, I'm not really working with XAML, but writing dependency behaviors or properties and whatnot. There are a few templates, like I mentioned, but couldn't show on Windows. There's also the opportunity to have the preview being shown for how your form will actually look like. And yes, by the way, maybe also worth to mention, edit and continue was recently added, but only works on .NET frameworks except WPF, by the way. And also I haven't shown coverage. This works on mostly all platforms except Mono. So also including OS X. Okay, more questions? Otherwise, if a question appears maybe sometime later, just write me or ping me if you see me, knock me out, that's okay. And yeah, thanks again. Have a good closing keynote.